Alrighty. So that video, it's a couple years old, so we know now in 2018 Democrats took control. There's a little bit more drama with impeachment. Is it going to happen? Is it going to not with President Trump? And we sit here today with still no president ever being kicked out of office through an impeachment, and it is pretty rare. So, from the video, do you remember who has actually been impeached? Andrew Johnson over reconstruction of southern states, and Bill Clinton over charges that he committed perjury and obstructed justice in an investigation. Most people assume Bill Nixon was impeached, and he would have been impeached. It was definitely going that route, but he quit office beforehand, only president to have resigned. And with that, let's take a look at the roles of the presidency. They have to fulfill quite a few roles. Head of state. They act as the head of the government. They represent the people. This is part of the reason we look to the president as the leader of the government, the representative of the entire country. Then we have them as the chief executive. They're the head of the executive branch. They enforce the laws. They have all those executive powers we already covered. Commander-in-chief, leader of the military. But they cannot declare war. This is another check and a balance. Even though they lead the military, they do not have the power to go in and do whatever they want in a wartime. What that requires, a declaration of war, is for it to go to Congress. Congress is representing the people. It's representing the country. So if the country wants to go to war, then you will let the representatives know, the senators, and they will be voting usually what the people want. Usually when it's a big war event, for example, World War I, World War II, but even more recent wars like Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, usually Congress backs the president when going to war. Now, that takes time though. They have to look at all, they have to weigh everything, the pros and cons. Is this something we should actually get involved in? When that happens, the president can go to war for 60 days. So this gives them immediate action. And for an example, in response to 9/11, the next day, President Bush started sending special forces out. That is within his 60-day limit of sending troops in response to something. That way they don't have to wait for the Senate to debate and decide. That president can immediately enact something. Within those 60 days, if Congress decides not to go to war, then and at the end of the 60 days, they have to pull the troops home. They are also the chief diplomat. They're in charge of, in general, foreign policy. Foreign policy gets brought up a lot in presidential election times. What would you do? How would you interact with these people? They can appoint ambassadors all around the world. They sign treaties with Senate approval. They're also the legislative leader. We talked about this kind of with the State of the Union, but they can have legislative policy. They say, hey, this is what I want to push. Example, President Obama with the Affordable Care Act. That is one of his legislative policies that he pushed very strongly. They cannot introduce a bill, but they can suggest a bill. So they can call House of Representatives, senators, and say, hey, I'd really like this bill if you start it. And they are also the economic planner. They're in charge of the proposed budget. It is done every year. But, as another check and a balance, it has to be approved by Congress. If you have a president that is Republican or Democrat, and Congress is the opposite political party, and the budget goes to Congress, there's a good chance that Congress is going to slash a lot of that budget and not approve everything that the president necessarily wants, because Republicans and Democrats have different priorities and what should be spent with government money. And last but not least, they are the party leader. They lead their political party. They will build support minor candidates. It's part of the reason you see presidents going to smaller states, even larger states, but saying, hey, I support so-and-so. I give my support. If it's a popular president, that will usually help them building up support to win the election. Now, when looking at powers, looking at roles, presidents can only do all of this within their 4-year term or their second 4-year term. So they have 8 years. But presidents sometimes leave legacies far beyond 8 years or 4 years. 3 of the main ways that this can happen appointing a Supreme Court justice. We'll talk about this more in Unit 5, but Supreme Court justices are appointed for life. They essentially always will outlast the president that's appoint them. Executive order that doesn't get repealed by another president. If an executive order is put in place, it needs to be reapproved by the following presidents, otherwise it will get repealed. So if other presidents continue to sign it, that first president is the one that put it into place. And a pardon. This is a power the presidents have, the governors have. They can pardon somebody. The president can pardon at a federal level. Governors can pardon at a state level. They go through, and there's always pardons. Usually more pardons happen in the second term than in the first term. When these pardons happen, it's a big deal. And a very famous pardon that happens every year, actually, is around Thanksgiving. Every president pardons one turkey at Thanksgiving before we start eating up the other turkeys. So, that's how they leave a legacy. Those are the requirements, the powers, and the roles of the presidency. So in the next video, we're going to start looking at the vice president.